Hello and welcome back. I'm Tara Swigert, and today I'm going to talk about my year of reading. I had a really great year of reading in 2019, so I'm going to share with you some stats, some the genres that I read the most of, and then my most favorite books. And in the description below, I will include a link to my most favorite books. If you use that link, it takes you to Amazon. I get a tiny percentage of your sale. It doesn't change the price to you at all, but that helps support these reading videos. And really, I just use that to either buy baby formula, diapers, or books on Amazon. Here's my stats for 2019. In 2019, I read 137 books. Now this includes 7 kids books because this number is from Goodreads. So I track all of my reading there, and I'll include a link so you can see my whole year in review and all the book covers there. But the picture books I really love or that I want to remember that we read and I'm adding them to my wish list, I put on Goodreads. So they're not all on there. I read many more than 7, but those 7 I read a lot and they were favorites, and I think we own them. So I also keep Goodreads up to date. I use Goodreads as both a way to track what I read and a way to track my book wish list and a way to track the books I own. I don't have every single book I own on my I own shelf in Goodreads, but if I read it and I own it, I put that on there just so that I know that I have it. I'm actually just this weekend going to start using BookBuddy. I'm going to scan in all of my books. I'm very excited about that. I may make that into a video for YouTube if you guys are interested. But okay, back to the stats. In 2019, I read 137 books. About 7 of those are picture books. That's a total of 36,666 pages. Which, what a weird number is that? Now that's the number according to Goodreads. So they get their book numbers from the publishers. That seems about right. One of those books was an audiobook, which was the Rob Thomas Veronica Mars mystery. I got an audiobook from my library through the Libby app, which is an app I used a lot. I absolutely love it. The shortest book I read was the Gruffulo, which is a kid's picture book, an all-time favorite, but then Jay became the reader of it for the girls because they like his voices better. I read that book probably 1,200 times. We're only counting it once. And the longest book I read was Illuminae by Aime Kauffman. It has over 600 pages, and it was one of my favorites. Totally worth the pages. But so that tells you the range of when I say 137 books. Some of them are 10 pages long, some of them are 600 pages long. Most of them, the average length is 267 pages. I wanted to see what genre do I read most of because I feel like I know, and I was right. So I combined thriller and mystery, and I read 49 thrillers and mysteries. And then the next most common thing I totaled up was nonfiction, which I included in here memoir and crafting books, like quilting, knitting, sewing books, and memoirs. Like this year I read Heather Armstrong's memoir about her experimental depression trial, and Busy Phillips's memoir. This one only heard a little, which is amazing. I read a Dolly Parton memoir. And then the other nonfiction is just like a lot of mental health research stuff. So of that kind of combined nonfiction, it's 35 books. Now I did separate out parenting because I was curious to see if I read way more parenting books than other nonfiction. That's kind of what I assumed. But really that was more in 2018. In 2019, I read 7 parenting or child brain books, like The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel, and 35 nonfiction. And then the other category I counted up was sci-fi fantasy. So that would be things like Illuminae and the Wayward Children series and An Unkindness of Ghosts. So of sci-fi fantasy, I read 14 books, which is lower than some years, but higher than other years. It really just depends on the year. A book like Recursion, which is heavy sciencey sci-fi and also very thrillery, what's gonna happen, I counted as sci-fi fantasy. Whereas if his other book, Blake Crouch's other book, Dark Matter, I would account more as thriller because it felt less sci-fi and more like, what's happening? So those are the genre I read. Not surprised if you listen into my like quarterly favorite books, you will notice they are heavy on the thriller mystery. So you can see all of the books I read. I'll include the link in the doobly-doo below so you can click on it and see everything. You can also follow or friend me on Goodreads and we can hang out there. And I don't review books much. I mostly just use it to track there. So the authors I read from most, which is also a clue into my favorite authors, were Riley Sagar. His book I'm going to talk about in a minute. His new book was one of my favorites, and I went back and I read his other two books, Every Time I Lie, The Last Time I Lied, The Last Time I Lied, and Final Girls. Both of those were great. So he only had those 3 books out. He's coming out with another book in 2020, which I'm excited about. I also went back and read all of Peter Swanson's mystery or thrillers, and it's because I loved his when she knew him, when he knew her, something like that. I didn't love his older stuff, so I'm like, meh. And I read a lot of Shauna Mcguire. She's one of my new favorite authors. She did the Wayward Children series, which I'll talk about in a minute, and Megan Abbott. So Megan Abbott has a new show out on USA called Dare Me, and it's based on her book. I read Dare Me, I read Give Me Your Hand, The Fever, all of her books that are, her first 3 books she did were noir. I didn't love those, but then she got into more contemporary thriller. Those are great. I'm going to read everything she ever publishes. I think it's interesting. I think this year is the most I've ever read since I've been on Goodreads. I probably read more than 137 books back when I was a kid. But I think I read so much this year, thank goodness not from depression, but because of having the kids. Jay and I would find when they would go to bed, we literally couldn't watch TV. Like it was too much input, it was too much noise, it was too much sound. I don't know if y'all have ever had 2 toddlers at a time, but it was like too much stimulation. Whereas reading, especially something that was like very, very engaging, like thrillers and mysteries tend to be, was exactly what I needed. It was both fast-paced enough to get me into it and like low stimulation. There's not noise, there's not sound, you don't have to follow something on a screen and then right? So it just like, it was a thing I did after they went to bed and while they were napping, and I was in the car so much more over the 6 months that we had the girls, and there was just like so many appointments, speech therapy twice a week. So I just had lots of chances to do, I couldn't have done anything else. I think that's why I read so much this year. I haven't really thought a lot about it. But the best books, let's talk about the best books. So these are in no particular order. I wrote them down as they came to me. What I noticed this year in my reading is that not every book had like a message or a lesson, but every book is about something. There is the story that it's about, the story that you're following, what it purports to be about, and then what it's really about. I feel like this is something that people are doing more and more, especially in mysteries and thrillers. I'm going to talk about what these books, what like the synopsis is, and then what I thought the books were really about, which is going to be different for everybody. Like when I read something, I'm going to see like a different point or a different quote or a different kind of perspective is going to jump out at me than it is you. So I would love if you have read these books, leave a comment below and tell me what were they about for you. So the first book, when I was thinking of books I love, these are not in order of my favorites. I can't do that. I feel like it's like picking a favorite dog. I mean, everybody knows Bo's my favorite dog. So the first book I've thought of is The Body Is Not an Apology by Sonya, Renee, Taylor. And this book, I think the subtitle is something about radical self-love. This book is so good. This book is, it's about going beyond accepting your body and other people's bodies and into recognizing the systematic oppression that stems from the idea of an ideal body. So it goes into sizeism, racism, ableism, and how holding on to hatred or disappointment or judgment of your own body is going to reflect out into society. It's going to reflect out into how you teach your kids to think about their body and other people's bodies. It's going to reflect out into how you treat people with other bodies. And it's not just about big bodies and little bodies, but also brown bodies and disabled bodies and the whole range. And all of that starts with how you are relating to yourself and your own body. And so she works through that. How are you relating to yourself? How does it impact society? And that is what it is about. Like, at its heart, is it is about changing your relationship with your own body so that you can change your relationship with how you interact with other bodies, which, by the way, all the humans you meet are humans in other bodies. So literally every interaction you have is impacted. So I recommend everyone read this book. If you have ever felt like your body was anything less than what it should be, or it didn't live up to some standard, or you wished it was different, you definitely need to read this book. The Body is Not an Apology. And if you have kids, even if you've always felt amazing about your body, you need to read this book because it will help you help them, and will also, you doing your own work about your own stuck places, let's call them, is going to help you model who you want to be to your kids. If you don't have kids and you've always felt like your body is absolutely perfect, amazing, and wonderful, that's fabulous. You should still read it so you have empathy for what other people are going through who live in other kinds of bodies. And that's what it's about. It's about creating like a more kinder, empathetic, compassionate world where we're not in the place of judgment, either for ourselves or for the people that we meet. And I mean, I think like it's work everybody should do in therapy. The only other nonfiction book on my favorite books of 2019 is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb, which is about therapy, but it's not about therapy. So it's about, Lori Gottlieb is a therapist, and she talks about how when a time in her life she decided to go talk to her therapist. I think it's after a serious breakup. So she tells that story interspersed with the stories of 5 of her patients, clients, people she's a therapist for, and the journey that they go on within therapy. But it's not about therapy. It's about connecting to humans and listening and finding that connection someplace. And if you've had a lifetime of unhealthy relationships, she talks about how therapy can help you build your first healthy relationship with you and your therapist. But I learned so much about healthy relationships, period. Like listening, learning, loving people for where they are, right where they are. Totally separate of therapy. Totally read this book. If you talk to anyone, you should read the book. Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. So good. So those are it for the nonfiction at the top of my list. I read other great nonfiction, like The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel. That's one that really shaped our parenting. So now let's get into fiction. The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. So I take my covers off my books, off my hardbound books, if they have paper covers, so that they're just on my shelf like this. So the Poet X, the sleeve actually has like a beautiful illustration on it. But The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo is told from the perspective of a young Black Dominican girl living in New York City who is, really it's her journey to become a slam poet, but the book is told in verse. So you can see that it's like, I'll be honest, I first opened this and I was like, no, I don't want to read poetry. I'm like, no, I'm not reading this. But I kept seeing reviews about how amazing it was. And so I was like, okay, I'll go back. I'll look into it, I guess. And I started reading. And once I got 5 pages in, I was like, oh my gosh, this is good. So it's the journey of this girl who is a teenager, 15, 16. Her mother is very religious and wants her to go to confirmation class. She's starting to have doubts about her, what she believes and what she doesn't believe. And she is discovering poetry and that slam poetry is a thing. And she's starting to perform and go to poetry club, but she has to hide it from her mom. That's what it's about, and it's from her perspective. What it's really about is that moment when the rest of the world recognizes your body as a woman's body, and you are not yet ready emotionally for what that comes with. So from guys like catcalling her on the street, to people she knows grabbing her, to her mom telling her body is sinful and she better watch herself because she's going to fall into sin at any minute. Like that journey that, like, if you have a female body you might have went through is intense, and she is working through it, and I've never read it like described so beautifully for what she's going through. So it's The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. It's beautifully written. It's just gorgeous language. The next book that I love, that is full of beautiful writing, is the whole series. There's 15 books. I'm on book 6 by Louise Penny, the Inspector Gamache series. So the Inspector Gamache is this is set in Canada. He's like the head of homicide for Quebec. And he is, most of the mysteries are set in the village of Three Pines, which is this tiny, beautiful village you can't find on a map. It's below Montreal on your way to Vermont. It's actually like right near where my grandparents actually live. My dad is from in Vermont, over the border. But it is made up, and each one is like a cozy mystery. It's mystery happens, usually off screen. It's not that gory or bloody. And Inspector Gamache shows up with his whole team. They solve it. A couple of the stories and the stories kind of build on each other, so you kind of want to start with the first one, but it's not a series like a lot of sci-fi and fantasy series. You really don't get a end until you get to the end. This one is like you get each mystery wraps up in the book, but there's also ongoing stories that keep going through. Probably my favorite one so far has been The Brutal Telling, which is book 4. It's really good. Mystery. Some of the people you've gotten to know that are like the villagers that he's become friends with look like suspects in a real bad way. This one goes really, you could start with number 4. I mean, you're not going to have a sense for who all the characters are like deeply, but you could start from number 4. The first 3 are slightly weirder. Like the ways that the murders happen are like, you're never going to kind of figure it out for yourself because they're just so bizarre. But if you wanted to, you could start with 4 and read 4 and 5. They kind of go together, but you will have a good sense of resolution if you just read 4. So it's A Brutal Telling, and the whole Inspector Gamache series by Louise Penny. I'm on book 6 right now, and my hope is to finish the series in 2020 until she releases a new one this summer. She releases a new one every summer, so me and Louise Penny will just keep on hanging out together. I am so happy I found that whole series. It is just like, oh, so I didn't tell you what it's actually about. So what is really about at the heart, murder is about emotion. And you are only going to find the actual reason that something happened by listening to the feelings and the stories that people tell themselves. So the books are I say they're a cozy mystery because they're set in a beautiful place. There's delicious food. There's always talk about the weather and nature and outdoors and man's relationship with weather and outdoors, especially in the winter or even in the spring when everything is beautiful. And so it's like beautifully written, just beautiful writing. And then something dark and evil happens, a murder, and the inspector shows up and listens carefully. And like he reads people, but not in the Sherlock Holmes kind of like cut off from his feelings way, but in like what they're telling themselves is wrong with their life and who they blame and if they were taking responsibility for their own issues. And that is really what it's about, which is why it's so much fun to keep reading, is to see him read people and also like get deeper insights into kinds of people. She has a really good eye for what people are truly like. And I love that. I feel like it's reading like psychological case studies every book, but less cold and calculating than that. So speaking of speaking of mystery, the next book on my list, which I also have here, is Lock Every Door by Rayleigh Sagar. Now, this is funny because, so this is the book of the month, you can see, but the cover of this book, like the slipcover, is hot pink. And it says real big, Lock Every Door. So grab it if you see it at a bookstore, because it is a thrilling thriller. It is like edge of your seat. There is a twist. Oh my gosh, who thought that was going to happen? Kind of thriller. It's about a woman in her 20s who just went through a breakup, doesn't have an apartment, doesn't have a job, needs a job in an apartment in New York City desperately. And she takes this very weird, seems too good to be true, house sitting job in an apartment building, this like old New York wealthy apartment building. Like everybody who lives there is like glamorous. They used to be famous or they're super, super rich. And there are several house sitters, apartment sitters there. And there are some weird rules. Like she's not allowed to have anybody over overnight. She's not allowed to have guests in the apartment at all. She's not allowed to talk to the other apartment sitters or any of the guests in the place. She's supposed to be in every night by like 11 p.m. And okay, that's weird, but it pays amazingly well. She gets to live in a beautiful apartment. Like, she doesn't mind, right? And then things start to go wrong. Things seem creepy. There are noises in the night. People disappear. She starts researching or researching this building, researching the people who are at the apartment, trying to figure out what is going on. Is she just maybe going crazy? Because you've already seen her break down in the beginning as like her life fell apart. What it's actually about is the fact that being poor and broke makes you feel desperate. And you do things that are unwise when there are lots of waving red flags, when you feel desperate because you need rent, because you need to eat, because you don't have money. Like several times in the beginning, she literally like runs out of money. She has to borrow a $20 bill from people. She ignores a lot of red flags and puts herself in, spoiler, danger. It's not really a spoiler. And because of her desperation. And that's what I loved about it, is that it is, as you're reading, you're like, oh, I mean, I saw myself in her scrambliness, and my younger self, I should say. And because a lot of times in thrillers or movies where people put themselves in dangerous positions, you're like, why are you doing this? You know better than this. That is silly. But in this book, you know her reasons, and it's because she doesn't have money. She needs money. Speaking of thrillers that are about something deeper, I read and love Stolen Things, which was published this year by R.H. Herron. Disclaimer, that's what I'm looking for. Disclaimer, I know Rachel from the internet. Like, we're internet friends, and have been for years. And so I read her book, Life in Stitches, which is her memoir about knitting and her life. It was really great. I read it on Kindle. I think I got it from my library through the Libby app. I was sent Stolen Things for free, so by her publisher. That said, I loved it. I wouldn't talk about it here if I didn't like it, if it wasn't one of my favorite books. It's about a girl whose mom is a police dispatcher and her dad is a chief of police. And the girl is biracial, and her dad is brown and her mom is white, and she is starting to participate in a group that's like Black Lives Matter. And then something happens to her, and she needs to figure out what it is that happened to her that put her in this place of danger. And the police arrest the black guy she's with, and she doesn't think he has anything to do with it, but it's really hard to know because she was given something and blacked out. And so her and her mom, basically her mom just believes her and they solve it together outside of the police. What it's really about is the tension between knowing and loving police officers. Rachel herself was a police dispatcher in San Francisco. Knowing and loving actual police officers, and then dealing with what's happening in the society at large with Black Lives Matter, and understanding and experiencing as a girl of color, who the main character is, experiencing systematic racism, and yet like knowing people personally and knowing that that's systematic racism and like interpersonal racism are two different things, but wanting to fight the one. And that's what it's about. It is so good, and it is very edge of your seat. And I did a review video where I talked about how much I loved it, like a reading vlog. And my best friend from high school said, okay, you've convinced me, I need to read that. That sounds great. And then she was nervous though, because it's about a mom and a daughter. And she has a daughter, how old is she? 7, 6? And she was like, is this gonna be hard? And I was like, the beginning is. I always debate about giving trigger warnings because I think they're very helpful in avoiding books that are gonna be too much for you, but also sometimes they're spoilers. So I would say that if you avoid books where there are instances of sexual violence against women, skip this one. That's what I'd say. If you like a good mystery that is not, there's no murder, so there's no splatteriness. So that's another thing, is I was asked, I did a whole video about non-splattery thriller recommendations, and this is on the list. It's not splattery, there's no murder. Okay, so next up that I absolutely loved is Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan Mcguire. So this is a very slim books. There are 4 or 5 books out in the series now. They might technically be YA. They didn't feel at all YA to me as I read them. I don't know what that means. I don't read a lot of YA. But they're fantasy series about children who have found doorways into worlds like Alice in Wonderland or The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where they have gone through a doorway into a world that just fit them, that they loved, that they had to, like go on quests and learn things and like rise through the ranks of if it was a kingdom, like whatever, they had this whole adventure, and then they get sent back to the real world, or our world, and a woman opens a home for them called the Home for Wayward Children, and parents think their kids have had some kind of psychotic break or that they were stolen, because sometimes time works differently in other worlds and our world. So sometimes the kids are gone for a long time, sometimes they're gone for like 24 hours, even though for them it was like 5 years. And basically these kids feel like they don't belong in our world, so they go to this world and they're with other kids who feel like they don't belong and want to get back to their magical world. Oh man, this book, so good, so beautifully written. I did a whole reading vlog about it. I'll link that up below. I loved it, and it was beautifully written, and what it's really about is feeling like you belong or don't belong in the world that you're in. So whatever that is, there's a whole range of kids who feel like they don't belong for different reasons and who have gone to different kinds of worlds. So the first book is about a little bit about the home and about one of those kids, and then as the series goes on, sometimes they actually go into the world with a child, like in Down Among the Sticks and Bones, you go with Jack and Jill to the world where they were sent, and you see what their time in that world was like. That's a much darker one. And Under the Sugar Sky is like this magical Candyland world, and that is a much lighter book. But basically in all of the worlds, they are overcoming obstacles that they faced in their real world, but this magical world is giving it to them in a way that they can handle it, like physically, like they can overcome it, go on a quest, get a thing they need, accept who they are in their hearts, that kind of thing. It's beautiful. I love it. I completely love it. I recommend it. Every Heart a Doorway. Each book is under 200 pages. I think they're like 120, 150 pages. Because I'm talking about a fantasy book, let me talk about my favorite sci-fi book. I don't know if I can. It was just really good. Illuminae by Aime Kauffman and Kristoff. It's crazy. It's bonkers. Like you should just plan for a bonkers good time. I just read this at the end of the year. I did not expect to be finding my favorite book. I read it because Books and Lala of Books and Lala said it's amazing. So it's so weird. It's over 600 pages. I really wish I had a copy here to show you, because it's not written in a normal narrative style. It is a dossier of information, conversations, emails, IMs. I guess people don't IM anymore. Like text messages, and schematics of the ship, and like someone transcribing what they could see on a video in a room. It's a dossier of information, and you don't know why this dossier has been put together, but you know someone's asked for it to be put together and sent to them because something happened. And it kicks off with a corporation bombing a mining colony on a planet. The survivors, this happens in the first few pages, the survivors all get on these 3 ships and they're being chased down by the people who just bombed the colony. So the whole book is this chase is happening, and then crazy stuff breaks out on these spaceships. Like there's a horror element of like a scary thing that breaks out on one of them. There is a AI problem where the computer is artificially intelligent and starts running the show, which is scary. These are not spoilers. I'm not giving away any of the spoilers. And it kind of reminded me, you know how I hope that you have watched Battlestar Galactica, the newer one that came out 2006, 2009, I don't know, something around there. One of the very first episodes of the new Battlestar series is they are being chased by the Cylons and they have to jump every like 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and they are doing it for days, and they're kept awake for days because they have to keep doing this thing that requires them all to be awake on the bridge. That's what it reminded me of. And like that sense of like, they're coming, the whole book, they're coming, but also crazy stuff is happening. And at the heart of it is 2 teenagers who are in love but are separated, but maybe they're not in love, you don't know. And their conversations back and forth as they're trying to figure out what's going on with the AI, what's going on with this corporation, like why is this corporation bombing this mining? What? And what is this all about? And also, what is the thing that's going on that is creepy and thrillery that's going on? That's scary. And very fast paced. Like for a book that's 600 pages, I was like flying through it. Oh my gosh. Ah. And some of the pages are like laid out in weird ways. So like when things go off into space, it'll be like a black page with the words like curly queuing out. So you're not reading 600 whole pages full of dense text, if that freaks you out. There's 3 books in the series, but each book has like a good solid ending. I felt satisfied at the end of Illuminae. Then I read at the beginning of this year Gemina, which is the 2nd book. Totally different story, also extremely good, all in the same world. So I'm looking forward to reading the 3rd book. So because I'm like committed to reading all 3 600 plus page books, it is like at the top of my list, Illuminae. Because if it wasn't really, really good, I would have quit at any point through it. It's really good. I guess it's YA too, probably. I'm recommending more YA than I normally read. I should have done a split of that in my genres to see how many I read. Because I think The Poet X would count as YA, and Every Heart a Doorway, the Wayward Children series would count, and then Illuminae. I wouldn't let my young kids, I mean, it's not middle grade. There's some scary stuff. So if you don't like splattery horror, I wouldn't read it. I had a Starship Captain tell me that she read it on audiobook and it was really good. They did different voices. I'm super interested in that because so much of it for me was the visuals, and then someone else bought it on ebook. I don't know how the ebook is going to show you, like, because some of them are transcripts of IMs and some of them are like official documents that like a lot is blacked out and you only see 1 page of, and then I don't know how they'll do that on an ebook, but I imagine it'll be great. It's Illuminae by Aime Kauffman. And then, even though I can't really pick a favorite, this is probably my favorite fiction book I read this year, and I'm going to reread it. I'm going to read everything by this author. It's Station 11 by Hilary St. John Mandel. And it is technically, I had no idea what it was about, and its cover looks kind of like tents set up, and I was like, is this a book about camping? What is this book about? The book is literary fiction. It's post-apocalyptic. You open on the flu taking out everybody, except for obviously some survivors, or else there wouldn't be much of a book. And in the book there are so that kind of happens in the beginning, and then what you're seeing is the way different people survive. So there are some survival camps that are like filled with survivalists, like the people who stock up on MREs and guns and that. There are some survival camps that are more like cults, where they all like follow this kind of religious guy, always a dude, because he's saving them, he's bringing them through the desert, like that kind of thing. And then some survival groups that are like just barely getting by, communities of people with no real leader. And then one of the survival communities is a troupe of Shakespearean performers. So they have an orchestra with instruments that they've, gathered up, they've scavenged basically, and actors and a director. And what they do is they travel from, I was gonna say town to town, but like camp to camp basically, and perform Shakespeare for people. And what the book is really about is there's some survivalist stuff in there, there's some post-apocalyptic stuff in there, but what it's really about is the need for community and art and beauty in order to survive the worst things. And there is a Star Trek quote that they use in the book. They mention Star Trek in the book because it's set in like our world, but after the apocalypse of the flu. And the quote is, survival is insufficient. And that's what the book is about. Simply surviving bad things is insufficient. What you need is art and beauty and hope and friendship and love. And the book blew me away. I was like, what am I reading? It's beautiful, it's deep, it's philosophical, and it's fast-paced. Like, it's not, you notice a lot of these things on this list are fast-paced because I had toddlers and I had to like be able to dive into it and understand what they're saying. So they can't be too esoteric for me to follow. So good. Totally recommend it. Station 11 by Hilary St. John Mandel. So that's it. Those are my favorite books. I don't know how many books I had. I had less than 10. I just wrote down which were my favorites. And yeah, so those are my best books of 2019. I would love to hear if you read them, if you think they're about something different or something else. Bo's decided we're almost over here. So comment below and tell me if you've read any of these books, what your favorite books of 2019 were. Tell me, I'll add them to my reading list of 2019. And thank you so much for watching. This Wednesday coming up is one of the most epic podcast episodes ever. It's all about creating your launch plan for 2020 or for your next launch. And I include lots of bonuses in it. So make sure you've subscribed so that you will get access to that.